Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome everyone to our APRU Asia Pacific Women Leadership Mentoring Program seminar. Today's seminar is called Imposter Syndrome, Women's Psychology and Society. My name is Joanna Regulska. I am Vice Provost and Dean of Global Affairs and also a Professor of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies and the APWIL co-chair. We are thrilled to gather together to discuss a topic that actually has come up numerous of times over the course of the start of our APWIL mentoring program 2 years ago, and that is the imposter syndrome. Today's presentation will focus on evidence-based approach to provide you tools needed to identify imposter syndrome and provide some examples relevant to women in higher education. Before we get started, we would like to take a group photo, and I invite you to turn on your camera, smile, so that we can capture today's group. Thank you so much for doing that. And are we taking the picture now?
Yes, please. Everyone just sit up straight, look at your cameras, and smile. Thank you. A couple of more? Keep smiling. That's it. Thank you. I got the pictures.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Gabriela María Ruíz Soto, who is Associate Director of the Health Sciences Division and Tecnológico de Monterrey on New Mexico City campus. She's committed to the professional development of women in the world, and she currently volunteers as a mentor in the Women's Network of the Mexican Institute of Industrial Property in Mexico, as well as in our second cohort of the APWIL mentoring program. I would like to thank Gabriela for moderating today's session, as well as connecting us with our two speakers, who she will introduce shortly. Thank you so much, Gabriela, and welcome to all of you to our seminar.
Thank you, Joanna. As Joanna noted, today we'll have a presentation on imposter syndrome from two colleagues at Tecnológico de Monterrey. After their presentation, we'll have time for about a 20-minute Q&A period. Please feel invited to share questions that you have using the chat, and we'll post them during the Q&A to our speakers. Our speakers today are Professor Arturo Sirgo Cruz and Dr. Cecilia Ahedo Azuara. Arturo Sirgo is a clinical psychologist with postgraduate training in systemic approaches and a specialization in family and couples therapy from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He currently serves as the head of the psychology department at the Tecnológico de Monterrey Medicine and Health Sciences School in the Mexico City region. Arturo's current topics of interest are the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on cognitive and emotional well-being among university students and faculty, and the role of psychology and psychotherapy in multidisciplinary health settings. We'll also hear from Dr. Cecilia Ahedo. Cecilia is a doctor in psychology with a focus on both health and clinical psychology, with postgraduate training in contemporary systemic approaches and family therapy from the University of Las Americas. She's currently the director of the Common Core stage in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico City. Cecilia's current topic of interest are the relationship between psychological well-being and inflammatory bowel disease, the impact of chronic disease in couples' relationships, and the role of psychology and psychotherapy in multidisciplinary health settings. Thank you, Arturo and Cecilia, for talking with us today on this important topic. I would like to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Gabi, and welcome everybody. As I don't remember who said, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for us. So I would like to share our presentation on Imposter Syndrome, Women, Psychology, and Society. So can you see it? Yeah, let's do this. So we decided to start this presentation with this quote because we considered very important to focus on what we actually need to focus on, which is inequity as the main aspect that leads us to develop imposter syndrome. The other day we were talking about imposter syndrome and we were saying, like in a game of words, if it was a syndrome or if it should be called the imposter symptom, just like that, because the syndrome is actually just a symptom of everything that's going on around in the society and that us as women have to face by dealing with specific aspects of society. So as an overview, we have two main psychologists who were the ones that observed that many high-achieving women tended to believe they were inadequate. So they actually were the ones that pinpointed the name of the syndrome, and they were the main researchers that claimed it. And by now we know that a Google search of imposter syndrome yields over 1 million hits. And actually, approximately 70% of people will experience it at some point in their lives. Even though it began focusing on women, we now know that it's a syndrome that affects minorities mainly. So it's really important that we know that by researching more over the topic and everything, we have learned that it's not only a syndrome that affects women, but it started as a topic directed to women. And now we know that there is no published review of the evidence to guide the diagnosis or the treatment of patients that present this syndrome. And we know that there are no published studies that evaluate treatments for this condition, which is actually really important because we don't know really how to approach it. We really don't know how to tackle it. And it's a huge problem. And I know that you as women know that it's actually a huge problem.
Okay.
So,
hi, Anna, sorry. May I compliment the slide? Hi, good afternoon, good morning, and good night to everyone. It is very important what Ana Cecilia is mentioning in this slide, because it is not one of the most important things that we have to take into account is that imposter syndrome is not a mental disorder. It is not a disorder. It is not classified as specifically something that we need to treat or something that we need to understand from the terms of mental health. We will talk about this extensively in our presentation, but for example, when we go to some of the manuals that describe mental disorders such as the ICD-11 or DSM-5 in the revision, in the current revision, you will see that there is no mention of imposter syndrome. Now, we will talk about this later. This does not mean that imposter syndrome is something that we should overview or discard. It is something that is very real, as Ana Ceci is mentioning, something that is very real and that happens specifically in minorities. But we will talk about the risk factors that are associated with this syndrome.
yes, thank you, Arturo. And so talking about the syndrome, it's been described as a pattern of behavior wherein people doubt their abilities and have a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. As I said before, it's more prevalent in minorities, which conform racial, ethnic, and religious, women, and high achievers, actually. So these are like the three main groups affected by imposter syndrome. And how it feels like constantly comparing yourself to others and worrying that you do not measure up to them. And some specifics that we should actually look for to know if we are developing or if we are going through some of the symptoms related to the imposter syndrome are a sense of being a fraud, fear of being discovered as this fraud, as if your colleagues or your teachers or your co-workers or someone else is going to discover that you are actually not supposed to be at the place that you are right now, whether it's in your job or at your school or at your academic degree or whatever. Difficulty internalizing your personal success. And also, it might be showing in your behavior, because you might be holding yourself back from doing different things because you don't feel like you have the ability to do it, or you feel like you're a fraud and you shouldn't be undertaking those responsibilities. So you avoid taking new responsibilities because you don't feel like you're going to be able to do them. You doubt yourself. You sometimes might attribute your success to outside factors, like, yeah, I just got here because I have money, or they like me, or because I paid for my tuition and that's how I got my advance in my degree and stuff like that. And it actually is sometimes linked to job dissatisfaction and burnout, because people do not like to take other responsibilities or to try to advance in their career because they don't feel like they are able to. So they get comfortable with jobs that do not demand a lot from them because they think that they cannot do it. People also avoid seeking promotions at their jobs because they don't think that they can make it. And you have a constant fear of failure, which means that you can take like this overachieving position where you try to do more than you should because you need that you have to prove yourself to others so that they don't find out that you are the imposter, just like in the game Among Us that became very popular during the pandemic. And so I found this image that was like really showing, and it was actually really important for me to show you because I remember a long time ago, I'm not as young as I look, a long time ago, I went to a conference of psychologists. I had always thought, because I had always heard that psychology was a profession for women. So I was always thinking that it would be filled with women. And I went to a conference and there were mostly men. It was just like 2 or 3 young women in the conference, but most of the audience were men and the people that were presenting were men. And I was wondering, why were there no women in the audience and also no women presenting in the conference? Later on, I found out that this phenomena was really common, was really popular. And actually, I kind of like understood that the higher up I went, the less women I would see. So that's why I thought that this image was really important to put here.
Yes, and specifically because of that, it is I am very respectful of all the female leadership that has brought us here today. Very thankful for Chelsea and Kimberly and Cecilia and Gabi and all the people that invited us today. And that is why basically in this presentation, I am here to give some viewpoints about specific psychology points, but mainly this is Ana Cecilia's show, and that's why I consider it really, really important. If you can go back, Ana Cecilia, to 2 slides where you talk about burnout. Basically, one of the important things that I was mentioning related to mental health is, even though imposter syndrome is not a diagnosis for a mental disorder or for a bigger problem, it says so right there. Imposter syndrome can lead to job dissatisfaction and can lead to burnout. You here are almost all of them, as I understand, fellow academics. So you must share the sentiment of feeling with burnout, specifically at the end of terms or at the end of research proposals. And it is important to understand that burnout is also a risk factor for developing different anxiety disorders. So, like I said, even though imposter syndrome is not a disorder per se, it can lead to burnout, and then burnout can lead, if unattended or if normalized, it can lead to different severity of anxiety disorders. So that's why it is very important to take care of the triggering factors, such as imposter syndrome, like Ana Ceci mentioned. It is not definitely on the minorities or on the women's side, but as she is going to explain very beautifully later on, it is related more to society and systemic factors that constrain minorities' views in how they perceive themselves and their sense of self. Now, when we talk about academia, now we can go back to the next slides. Imposter syndrome and academia. As Chelsea and Kimberly were explaining to us in the APRU, most of you, if not all of you, are working in academia right now, and we were especially inclined to talk a little bit about how it is in the academic world that you experience imposter syndrome. And according to these authors, the syndrome is very much present in the academic world. I think I don't need to tell you, it is a common experience, as you have mentioned. It is a topic that has arisen frequently in your mentorship programs. And what these researchers discovered is that the syndrome is very much present, but especially at a younger age. I know that Ana Ceci says that she doesn't look as young as old, or what did you say? I don't look as young or as old, but she's quite young. I saw her today. She is quite young, and this is something that happens in younger scholars. What we have been experiencing in new generations and in the last few decades is that these high achieving academic scholars are climbing up the ladders of the academic world at a young age. Specifically, not as the social view of what a scholar should be from what we understand from last century, right? Like someone who has been tenured and is of age. Usually what we see is very dynamic and high achieving at a young age, even in their late 20s or early 30s. And that's when the feelings related to imposter syndrome start to appear. This scholar, as they mentioned, ascribes their accomplishments to luck and contingency rather than individual skill and merit. And that certainly creates a lot of fear. Fear, like Ana Ceci mentioned, fear of being exposed, and fear of at any given moment someone will find out about me, and that creates lots of stress, which can lead to anxiety and which can lead to some bigger problems later on. That's the fear of being exposed as charlatans. The next one, please. The onset of imposter syndrome, and I wanted to include this quote because I think some of you, most of you, I don't know, should be related to that. I don't know, Ana Cecilia, if you have been related to that. They begin or they manifest themselves in the onset, sometimes in graduate school. When you start in Mexico, what we say a master's degree or a doctoral degree or a postdoctoral degree, and that's when some of those feelings start to arise, like I shouldn't be here, specifically when you look at the group surrounding you, and then you attach certain qualities to the group that you share your studies with that magically you don't have. You don't have those qualities that you see in others. Therefore, you are the one that is the imposter, just like Ana Ceci mentioned about Among Us. Like I am the one that does not belong to this group. And then it is intensified when academics take on management responsibilities. And that's why it's very important that we talk about, we're going to be talking about this later on, about the organizational charts in your own institution. Like, how does that look? Because management responsibilities and management positions in academia have historically belonged to men. And that needs to change. And that's when and like Ana Cecilia mentioned it beautifully, When you start climbing the ladder of academic or corporate world, then you start seeing less and less and less of women or different minorities. And that's when these feelings of related to imposter syndrome start to appear with more intensity. We're going to be talking about that later on, about how we should look at these organizational charts and to see if they have changed a little bit or a lot in recent years.
And actually, this is really important for me because I was doing my PhD while I started undertaking management responsibilities, and it was crazy for me because I kept all the time comparing to others. And when I say others, I'm going to say specifically to men. I looked up to my male teachers. I was really astounded by the amount of knowledge they had. And I looked at my female teachers as colleagues, even though I know that I'm a feminist. But it was really difficult for me to think that I was going to be able to reach those positions, those levels, and that I was going to be able to overcome all of this process. And actually, I remember perfectly that fear that they were going to discover that I was the imposter and that I shouldn't be finishing my thesis, my dissertation. And so the first area that we think that should be focused on is society, because imposter syndrome shouldn't be viewed as a personal challenge, because it's not a personal problem. It's more of an intricate combination of different processes and different systemical factors which create actual and detrimental consequences to people affected. So the moment you asked us for specific tips or ideas of how to overcome imposter syndrome, we were thinking well, we have to tackle society and all the problems that create this sort of syndrome. The syndrome is just a symptom of whatever society is making us believe that we are not as able or as competent as other people. And also, it's really important because, as Arturo said, imposter syndrome is comorbid often with depression and anxiety, and it's also associated with impaired job performance, job satisfaction, and burnout, as we already said. No, so it's really important to know that imposter syndrome has a really big impact on our mental health and our overall well-being. So we have to understand that from a psychological point of view, we have to do something to diminish the impact of this problem that we have systemically developed. And I think that it's actually increasing rather than decreasing. So it's really important. And then talking specifically about women, this article in the Harvard Business Review was really interesting to read because it was actually, like you can read it in the title, no? Stop telling women they have imposter syndrome. And it was actually written by this Black woman, and she actually explained how she was the minority of the minority and how she experienced imposter syndrome worse because she was really attacked, and she developed all these processes linked to what she had been experienced. So she explained that she had developed burnout syndrome, that she felt like interrogation from colleagues and censoring was one of the main aspects that made her develop the syndrome as such, because women are not as men are not as interrogated by their colleagues as women are. So it's really important to look at that. And also, imposter syndrome has been linked to overt and covert bullying in the companies and the institutions, and it has been linked to self-doubt, and lack of confidence, and systemic racism and bias. So it's really important that we acknowledge all of these systemic factors that are linked and that are also a consequence that creates a vicious cycle that do not let us minorities to get out from there. And also we have to consider that there are historical and cultural contexts that are really related to how imposter syndrome is developed in an individual, because it's not normal that there are different countries that have different levels of how people experience imposter syndrome. So there are historical and cultural aspects that we have to take into account, and also the climate in their workplace and their environments, because it's not the same if I look around and I see a lot of women and I feel comfortable and I feel able and I see people similar to me that are achieving the same things that I am, rather than whatever I see when I look around is difference, and is me being the one that stands out, because that is going to, like right now that I'm speaking English, which is not my native language, and so it makes me a little bit uncomfortable and stuff. That's because I'm looking around and I'm thinking, oh, I'm different here. I'm the one that speaks Spanish. And that's actually really interesting, because when you look around and when you see the difference is when you become aware of that difference. It's when you acknowledge that difference, and that's when it hits you. And that's when it makes it harder for you to overcome that difference. And of course, feeling unsure shouldn't make you an imposter. You're never the imposter if you just feel unsure. It's natural for the human being to feel unsure in specific settings. And also that bias and that exclusion exacerbates sometimes those feelings of doubt. And this is the most important thing. Confidence doesn't equal competence. And I remember a long time ago, I saw how a lot of my male colleagues, well, they weren't my colleagues, they were my bosses. When I was in another instituto, it wasn't at Tec de Monterrey, it was in a different place, but I remember it was all male. No, in the higher positions, they were all men, and they were always telling me, fake it till you make it. And I was like, yeah, but if you fake it and if they discover you, nothing's gonna happen. But if I do, they're gonna point at me. And that's where it's important to know that sometimes people just show confidence because they can do it, but it doesn't mean they are competent or that they are more competent than you. That's why it's important to fix bias, not women, in these settings. Arturo, you wanted to talk? Okay. Sorry. So some tips that we can actually look for ourselves is to look at the evidence and to understand, as I always tell my students, is that if you have reached a certain point, it's mostly because you deserve to be there. It's probably because you have actually gained it. It's actually because you have done everything you had to get there. So it's to look at the evidence and trust the evidence. Also to celebrate our successes, to remember that a lot of people might feel this way, that we have to actually fake it till we make it sometimes, and that we have to believe in ourselves and we have to think that we can do it in order to do it. Also to stay humble. And for example, Craig actually proposes that we have to look at difficult tasks and to reframe them sometimes if they seem too difficult for us and they start to trigger the syndrome, so that we can make it easier for us to work smart, to feel some relief when we achieve what we wanted to achieve and when we reach our goals, and take ownership of those goals, to seek out tasks that we are good at, so that we can feel like we have achieved a lot of stuff, to seek support in others. And finally, it's super important to talk about it. I started to acknowledge that I had imposter syndrome when I started to talk with other women. And when they started to tell me I feel the same way, and they actually were the ones to show me about the syndrome, to tell me about it and to explain it to me, to create awareness and to be aware of what we are feeling so that we can understand it and not let it overcome us, to forget about being perfect. I just say ditch perfection. Nobody's perfect, and nobody is as good as we probably think they are, or probably not all of the times, and to challenge those negative thoughts, because I really think that again, if you have gotten to the place where you're at, it's because you've earned it and because you deserve it. So it's really important to know that. So Arturo?
Yes, so we are getting close to the end of our presentation, and we just wanted to share with you some examples at our institution, at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Just some disclaimers. As you may already know, or maybe not, Mexico is a country that, among its many problems and difficulties and challenges, sexism and gender differences and inequalities is one of them in a big way. So when you go to the corporate world or academics or basically any field, you will see men all over the place. That's what happens in our specific culture. So we wanted to highlight some of the things that we do as an institution. We were just discussing 5 minutes before we started this seminar with Jacqueline, and she was telling us that they were talking to our institution's department. We have a department that is called Human Dignity, and they work in specifically attempting to reduce inequalities based on gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, and it's a new department. It has been, I don't know, maybe a couple of years, maybe 3 years, 4 years, but it is starting to change the culture at our institution. I have been in this institution for maybe 15 years, close to 2 decades, and I have seen some of the changes in the past years that are attempting to solve and reduce the most glaring inequalities that we have as a society, and that Ana Cecilia has explained in a very good way. Also, I just read from Laura. She was saying in the comments, she was talking about science specifically, like how in the academic world it has been difficult, but specifically in the science departments, the lack of spaces for women that trigger these feelings of imposter syndrome are prevalent. And that's why in one of the examples that we wanted to share with you is something that is called Premio Mujer Tec, which is the award for women at tech. I know it sounds a little bit I don't know, but trust me, it has a legitimate objective, not only by recognizing women once a year or something like that, but really trying to visibilize what has been invisible for so many years, which is women's accomplishments in economics, in society, in politics, in science. And that's why every year this award has gotten bigger and bigger. It started, I think, 5 years ago with a very small ceremony to acknowledge the awards, and now it is a yearly thing, very well established. And as you will see in the next slides, it covers a lot of categories. So in the next one, we will see that its purpose is to recognize and visibilize our community's women and their skills, career, and contributions. It is meant to be an open space to share women's accomplishments in politics, society, and economy. And as Ana Cecilia has explained before, seeing what is not different but similar might inspire you. And when we see all of our female students, female academics, and female directors at the Institute, the objective is for them to feel inspired and to acknowledge that their contributions and that their discoveries and that their work matters, and it is visible and it is important, and that might shift a generational change. And that's what we are all betting on. When we visibilize and when we make everything visible, and when we see not the difference but the similarities, and when we see women in position of power, women in position of importance that are being acknowledged, that creates a generational inspiration for our students to continue with that growth. The next one, Ana Sophie, please. This year, our institution announced winners in the following categories, and there are 369 categories for the awards. She4She, which is working in gender studies, sports and sports management, gender-focused work on citizenship, health and well-being, sustainable development, arts and culture, science, which was what I read from the comments, business, and global leadership. No? And so as you can see, every year it has gotten bigger, and we are very proud of these first steps that we are taking into create a more equal and an environment, an academic environment, which is more just and on the same level for everyone. Lastly, the last example that we want to share with you is, like I mentioned, looking at the institutional organization chart. Sometimes these positions are there. You just need to make them visible, and as Ana Ceci said, look around and share your successes. We both work at the Medicine and Health Sciences School at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico City specifically. And we are very proud to say that the health schools have seen a shift in the last decades that are directed toward much more female representation and positions in positions of power and decision-making positions. If you look at the organizational chart at our school, 60% of management positions are occupied by women. Obviously, we have some steps or some further steps that we need to take into account. For example, our dean is a man, but Ana Ceci will tell you that he's very well aware into these gaps and is actively trying to reduce these gaps. But my colleagues, female directors, people that are in charge of academic department, people that are in charge of complete programs, for example, in medicine, are women. And that inspires the almost 65% of the student body in our school, which are female. And I think I was generous, Ana Ceci. I think 65, well, not generous, sorry, the opposite of generous. I think I undermined the number. I think it's close to 70 or 75%. As you, I don't know if that happens everywhere in the world, but in Mexico specifically, the psychology studies and the nutrition studies are approximately 90–95% women. And looking at the teachers, the faculty, the directives, the person that are decision makers, we see that the vast majority is women. I know that in order for that to change the systemic view or the society view of how these gender gaps and inequality gaps have formed, it goes a long way. I know that the example of a single institution, a single school in a single campus in just one school in Mexico may not be like the biggest example, but it is a first step. And as Ana Ceci mentioned very well, that might inspire other people to follow and to see not the difference, but the similarity. Basically, that's what I wanted to share about the examples at our institution. So, Ana Ceci, back to you.
Well, I think that's it for the presentation, but yeah, that's actually when Arturo and I were talking about this presentation, I told him that I think it was on Women's Day that I told my friends, because I looked around and we were all women and they are all directors. Some of the nutrition program, some of the process of attracting new students, and some of other departments, but I could see that there's a lot of representation of women in science, which is actually really important for me because now I don't feel as an imposter anymore. So it's really interesting to see those changes, and being able to share it with you is really important for me, because I know that if I had heard this earlier, I might have felt a little bit more comfortable while advancing in my career. So I think it's really important to share it with you. And so thank you.
Thank you very much, Arturo and Ana Ceci. Now we'll start with questions. We invite the audience to post their questions in the chat, but also you can raise your hands and we'll open the mix for you. We have already 2 questions. One of them is how to deal with social media and imposter syndrome. Do you have any ideas?
I actually do. I am a firm believer that you create your own social media. So if you can see, and if you discover, and if you learn that whatever you are obtaining from that social media is undermining your confidence and your well-being and your mental health, you should stop consuming that. Social media is just for consumption, and you can choose what you can see and what you don't want to see. So I think that it's actually really good to look for good role models and to look for inspiring people that can help you to feel less as an imposter and more of a person that has a long way to go. So I think that it actually could help to do that.
Thank you. We have a question from Sanita. Sanita, would you like to say aloud your question?
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I just sometimes wonder in our processes, and I mean, I'm sure everybody's got different experiences, but personally, I feel that women sometimes are, we actually are harder on one another and don't always support one another to overcome things like imposter syndrome by highlighting differences, or our circumstances are so different, and often the people who have much more traditional roles or a huge variety of roles find it harder to navigate the space. And I just wondered whether this was something common for everybody. Who are women, perhaps who've got either children or elderly parents, and have a lot of carer responsibilities, and comparing to somebody who can only focus on their academic career, there's a huge difference there, and it makes it much harder. So I wondered what your perspectives were on that.
Yeah, I actually think that it's a part of all the problems that have been like sustained socially for a really, really, really long time. Like, I know that us as women have different processes, and that we haven't faced the same difficulties, and when we don't understand what another woman's coming from, we might be too harsh on her because she hasn't overcome what we have, or she hasn't tried to do what we have done, or whatever. But I think that it's part of everything that's, I'm sorry, but I always reach that point, everything that's socially grown. So I think that we should change that. I think that it should be like a systemic change, because it shouldn't be only a matter of women. It should be a matter of everybody. And I actually think that we should be all the other way around. we should help women to do everything that we need to do to grow and to share our responsibilities and to diminish our difficulties. Right now, we just had, I call him the health sciences school baby. One of my friends actually just had her baby, and I was thinking how difficult it would be for her to raise him if she didn't have the help of all of us. So I think that it's really important for us to help each other and to actually acknowledge this problem, because it's a social problem that I think that we should tackle. Arturo.
And Saneta, as that's a good thing to ponder on, because like Anastasia, like all of you are saying, if we say women should think or should reframe, which are some of the suggestions, but also that leaves it is not, how can I say this? It is not fair to leave like all of the work to women, right? Like obviously we have to look at this problem as a systemic problem in which all have to participate. And I want to share an example with a lot of respect by me saying, me, a cisgender man that considers himself a feminist, but I don't know, and with biases and obviously some shortcomings. During the pandemic, my wife is also a scholar. My wife is actually studying her doctoral degree. And when we talked about the pandemic and the shared experience of childcare, like you mentioned, Saneta, that's what triggered me in your question about childcare. I was under the impression that it was equal. And when I talked to her, she said, it wasn't. It wasn't equal. And it's not that I was like purposely not seeing it. I was genuinely not seeing it. And it has been long conversations with my wife about, you know, how this shared participation needs to, like men need to put a lot of work. That's basically what I'm saying. Like all of us have to put a lot of work, because these perceptions are ingrained in society. And that's just a small example. I think that I am very libertarian and feminist and, you know, and progressive. And when I talk to my wife, she says, a little bit, but not so much. You know, like you're still very traditionalist, and still all the work is on me. And that has helped me a lot, you know, like also seeing your own biases as a man, as a person in position of power, and to see what you are doing to sustain those inequalities. And one example, I am not going to get political, excuse me for getting a little bit political, but in recent weeks, our Mexican president mentioned that psychiatric care and mental health care should belong to families and not hospitals. And but we all know what that means. When he says families, he means women. He means women taking care of the ill, which is something that is very pervasive in our society. And, you know, also what I'm trying to say is that it needs to change in a systemic way, gender biases in men and women, and also who we vote into office, civil organizations, like it is like a complete work, you know. I don't know if that adds a little bit to what you were saying, Saneta.
So it's just good to have it on the table. I think perhaps something that I'll say that's, I don't know, to my detriment, but specific colleagues who tell me, oh, it's weekend, so they have they can use the whole weekend to do their research or whatever, they are uninterrupted, or we've got a long weekend, you know, with a public holiday. So, and this is just sharing my own challenges. Perhaps my saying these days are, oh no, I'll have to spend time to raise the next level of taxpayer, you know, to make sure that there would be aged care, you know, for the next generations. But that is unfortunately perhaps not the best answer to give somebody, but making myself much more comfortable with a range of roles and what I'm able to do, I think is also important.
Thank you. We still have time for one last question. So who would like to ask something else? Well, if there isn't anything else, we would like to thank you, all of you, for your questions and this discussion. And also we would like to thank Arturo and Ana Ceci for speaking with us today. I will now pass it to Dr. Sabrina Lin for closing remarks.
Thank you, Gabriela. And I want to also thank Gabriela for being our moderator, and Ana Cecilia and Arturo for sharing imposter syndrome. It's actually really great for webinar givers to actually share tips and personal experience, as well as institutional examples. So, and especially for Arturo for being a very strong, clearly very strong male ally, right, for the minority of women. So thank you very much. Just a quick announcement for our Women in Leadership. Okay, here I see the slide. Upcoming mentoring program events, right? So please pay attention to the speed networking sessions. I don't know if people have gone to speed dating sessions, but it's an opportunity for a mixer virtually for all of our mentors and mentees to find out a little bit more and also to get to know each other more. That this has been a big request from previous mentoring program participants. I won't read out the dates, but please note the dates there. We also have the graduation ceremony also coming up as well. These are our next two events. And obviously now we have about a half hour for networking for the mentors and mentees that are here. And let me now turn it over to Chelsea, who is our APRU mentoring program manager, to set us all up for the informal networking session that we have. Chelsea?